What is the meaning of this mess?
Ma'am, it was an accident.
You have no right to speak to me like that. How dare you? You're fired.
What's going on here?
I'm your mother.
How dare you speak to me like that?
Ma'am, I was just doing my job.
Your job is to be invisible.
Everyone, calm down. What's going on?
I'm not the nanny. I'm your mother.
What?
Mom, explain yourself.
Billionaire's mother pretended to be a nanny in her son's mansion to test his wife. The gate at 14 Renfield Court opened slowly, like it didn't want to let her in. Odalis Marchetti stood on the other side of it, gripping the handle of an old canvas suitcase that had seen better decades. She was 68 years old. Her hair was silver and pinned back the way her own mother used to wear hers. She wore a plain grey cardigan, sensible shoes, and a face that had learned a long time ago how to hide what it was feeling. She looked up at the house. It was enormous. White stone, black shutters, a fountain out front shaped like two swans. Somewhere behind those windows was her son, Griffin Marchetti, 34 years old, CEO of a company most people couldn't even pronounce. Worth, according to the last magazine article she'd read in a waiting room, more money than she could picture in her head. And he didn't know his mother was standing at his gate. That was the whole point. Name? A voice crackled through the intercom, flat and impatient. Odalis cleared her throat. Odalis, I'm here for the nanny position. Agency sent me. A long pause. You're late. I'm sorry. The bus. Just come in. Doors open. The gate buzzed. Odalis stepped through, wheeling her suitcase over the gravel, past the swan fountain, up the marble steps to a front door taller than her entire kitchen back home. She'd had a kitchen once, a small one, yellow walls, a window over the sink that looked out on a maple tree. She'd raised Griffin in that kitchen, taught him to crack eggs without shell in the bowl, taught him what $1 was worth by making him count out coins for penny candy. His father had left when Griffin was 6. There had been years, hard years, where Odalis worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. Griffin remembered all of it. He told her so, plenty of times, with tears in his eyes, thanking her for everything she'd sacrificed. But that was 3 years ago. 3 years since he'd married Priscilla. 3 years since the phone calls got shorter, since the visits stopped. Since Odalis had gone in her son's life, from the woman who raised me to a name that came up less and less at family gatherings that didn't happen anymore. She didn't know Priscilla. Not really. She'd met her twice, once at the wedding, where Odalis had been seated at a table near the kitchen doors, and once at a Christmas dinner 2 years back, where Priscilla had spent the whole night on her phone and called Odalis sweetie in a tone that wasn't sweet at all. Something had changed her son. Odalis just didn't know what. So when she'd heard, through an old family friend who still worked in the Marchetti household as a groundskeeper, that Griffin and Priscilla were hiring a temporary nanny for their new baby, while their regular one was on leave, Odalis made a decision. She would not go as his mother. She would go as a stranger, and she would watch. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman in her 50s, wearing a crisp black and white uniform, looked her up and down with tired eyes. "You're the new nanny." "Odalis." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Denise, head of household staff." Denise stepped back to let her in, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Listen, quick advice, free of charge. Keep your head down. Do your job. Don't talk unless you're talked to. Mrs. Marchetti isn't—" She stopped herself. "She has high standards. I understand." "Do you?" Denise almost laughed. "We'll see." The foyer alone was bigger than Odalis's old house. A chandelier the size of a small car hung above a curved staircase. Fresh flowers, white roses, sat in a crystal vase on a marble table. Somewhere upstairs, a baby was crying, a thin, tired cry, the kind that had been going on a while. And then a voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the house. "Denise, where is she?" "I don't have all day. I have a lunch at 1. Priscilla Marchetti came down the staircase like she was descending onto a stage. tall, polished, not a hair out of place, wearing cream silk and gold jewelry that probably cost more than Odalis's monthly social security check. Her eyes swept over Odalis once, top to bottom, and something in her face flickered with distaste. "This is her?" Priscilla asked Denise, as though Odalis weren't standing right there. "Yes, Mrs. Marchetti. This is Odalis. She's older than I expected." Priscilla folded her arms. "The agency said experienced. I hope they didn't mean ancient." Odalis kept her face still. She had held babies before this woman was born. She said nothing. "Can you even lift a child, chase after a toddler if he runs?" Priscilla's mouth curled. "I don't need a nanny who's going to have a heart attack on my Persian rug." "I raised a son on my own," Odalis said quietly. "I can handle a baby, ma'am." Priscilla's eyes narrowed slightly at the word ma'am, like she couldn't decide if it was respect or something else. "Fine, whatever. You're only here until Marisol's shoulder heals, a few weeks at most. Don't get comfortable." "Yes, ma'am." "The baby's name is Everett. He's 4 months old. He cries constantly, which is exhausting, so I hope you have patience, because I certainly don't." Priscilla checked her watch. "Denise will show you the nursery. Do not let him near the east wing. That's my husband's study, off limits to everyone. And do not engage with my husband if you see him. He doesn't need to be bothered by staff matters." Staff matters. Odalis had carried that man on her hip through a laundromat because they couldn't afford diapers one particular week. She had sung him to sleep in a rusted rocking chair with a broken armrest. She had sold her wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry she'd ever owned, to pay for his college textbooks his freshman year, and never told him where the ring had gone. Staff matters. "Understood," Odalis said. Priscilla was already turning away, phone in hand, thumb scrolling before she'd even reached the bottom step. "Denise, get her uniformed and up to the nursery. And somebody feed that child before I lose my mind." She disappeared down a hallway without another glance. Denise let out a breath. "Welcome to the house," she muttered. "Come on, I'll show you where everything is." As they climbed the stairs, the baby's crying grew louder. Odalis's chest ached with something old and instinctive, the pull toward a crying child that never really left a woman, no matter how many years passed. The nursery door was cracked open. Inside, a crib sat beneath a mobile of little golden stars, and in it, red-faced and wailing, was a baby boy with a shock of dark hair. Everett, her grandson. She hadn't even known his middle name, hadn't known his birth weight, his first word, whether he had his father's eyes or someone else's. She hadn't been told when he was born. She'd found out 3 days later, from a mutual friend, not from Griffin. Odalis walked to the crib, and without thinking, without hesitation, she reached down and lifted the baby into her arms. He quieted almost instantly. She held him against her shoulder, felt his small heartbeat settle, felt his fingers close around a strand of her silver hair. And for one moment, just one, the mask nearly slipped. Her eyes filled, her throat closed. "Hush now," she whispered, so soft only he could hear. "Grandma's got you." Behind her in the doorway, Denise watched with something like surprise. "Huh, he never calms down that fast, not even for Priscilla." Odalis blinked the tears back and turned, composed again. "Babies know gentle hands," she said simply. She didn't say the rest of it, that some things, blood things, run deeper than a person can explain, that her arms remembered how to hold this child because they'd once held his father the exact same way. Downstairs, a door slammed, and Priscilla's voice rang out again, scolding some unseen staff member about a wrinkled tablecloth. Odalis looked down at her grandson's sleepy face and made herself a quiet promise. "I'm going to find out exactly what kind of woman my son married. And God help her if she's cruel to the people who can't fight back. Because Odalis Marchetti had spent her whole life being underestimated by people with more money than sense. She was about to remind this house exactly what that felt like. The first week passed in a blur of bottles, laundry, and Priscilla's sharp voice echoing down marble hallways. Odalis learned the rhythm of the house quickly. Breakfast was served at 7, and Priscilla wanted her coffee exactly one way. Oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, no foam, and God help whoever got it wrong. Griffin left early most mornings, dressed in suits that probably cost more than Odalis's old car, murmuring quick goodbyes to a wife who barely looked up from her phone. He never once looked twice at the new nanny. Never lingered, never suspected. His own mother, 3 feet away, and he walked right past her like she was part of the furniture. It broke something in Odalis's heart, but she told herself it was for a reason. She needed to see. She needed to know the truth about the woman raising her grandson. And by day 4, she had her answer. Odalis. Priscilla's voice cracked through the nursery like a whip. Why is Everett in the blue outfit? I told Denise the cream one. The cream one photographs better. He spit up on the cream one this morning, ma'am, Odalis said gently. I changed him so he wouldn't sit in it. That's not your decision to make. Priscilla snatched her phone up, scrolling to a photo, clearly one she'd staged for her social media, Everett propped against pillows in an outfit stiff with newness. I have a shoot in 20 minutes. Change him back. He'll need to eat soon, ma'am. He's been fussy. I don't care if he's fussy. I care that my 600,000 followers see my son in the outfit I bought for this exact post. Priscilla's eyes flicked over Odalis with open contempt. This is why they should have sent someone younger, someone who actually understands what matters. Odalis changed the baby without another word. But that evening, alone in the small guest room she'd been given near the staff quarters, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry. Quiet, careful tears, the kind she'd perfected over 68 years of swallowing hurt in front of people who wouldn't understand it. This was the woman raising her grandson to care more about a camera than a hungry cry. The next few days only confirmed what she feared. Priscilla screamed at the gardener for trimming a hedge wrong, reducing the older man to a shaking apology. She fired a housekeeper over a missing hand towel, only for it to turn up in the laundry the very next morning. No apology followed. She spoke to Denise like she was something scraped off a shoe, and Denise, Odalis noticed, had a particular way of going still and small whenever Priscilla entered a room, like a woman who had learned to make herself invisible to survive. But it was what happened on the 9th day that Odalis would never forget. She was in the kitchen warming a bottle when she heard raised voices from the hallway. She peeked around the corner. An older woman stood near the front door, thin, stooped, wearing a faded coat despite the summer heat, holding a canvas bag stuffed with what looked like homemade jars of preserves. Priscilla stood in front of her, arms crossed, blocking the entrance like a wall. I told you people not to come here, Priscilla was saying. This isn't a food bank. I'm not asking for charity, the older woman said, her voice trembling but proud. I used to clean this house years back before you and Mr. Marchetti bought it. I just wanted to say hello, bring something sweet for the family. We don't know you, and frankly, you're trespassing. Priscilla's voice climbed. Denise, get security to walk her out. Please, the woman said. I don't care what you wanted. Priscilla's tone turned to ice. Some of us worked for what we have. We don't hand out money to every stranger who shows up with a sob story and a jar of jam. Odalis's hands tightened around the bottle warmer. She recognized that woman, faintly from years back, a former neighbor of Griffin's grandmother, kind as sunlight, the sort of woman who baked for anyone going through a hard time without being asked. She had nothing, and she'd walked, it looked like, quite a distance just to bring a small kindness to a family she used to know. And she was being thrown out like garbage. Odalis stepped into the foyer before she could stop herself. "Ma'am," she started, careful to keep her voice low, deferential, the voice of a nanny and not a mother. Perhaps she could just leave the jars and be on her way peacefully. No need for security. Priscilla turned on her, eyes flashing. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, ma'am." "Then get back to the nursery. This isn't your business." The old woman looked at Odalis with something like gratitude anyway, a small, sad smile, before Denise appeared, gently, quietly, and walked her back out the gate with an apologetic murmur that Priscilla didn't hear and wouldn't have cared about if she had. Odalis returned to the nursery with her jaw clenched so tight it ached. That night, she rocked Everett to sleep in the old chair by the window, humming the same lullaby she'd once hummed to his father. And as she hummed, she thought about her son, about the boy who used to cry when he saw someone else cry, who once gave his only winter coat to a classmate whose family had lost their apartment in a fire. Where was that boy now? Did he know what his wife did in his own house while he was away making deals? Did he even care? A soft knock came at the nursery door. Odalis turned, expecting Denise. It wasn't Denise. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered in shirt-sleeves with his tie loosened, dark hair slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it all day. He looked tired in that particular way. Successful men looked tired, like the exhaustion was expensive. He wasn't Griffin. "Sorry," the man said, voice low so as not to wake the baby. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Thaddeus. I work with Griffin. Just stopped by to drop off some documents, and Denise said the nursery was down this hall. Wrong turn, clearly." "It's all right," Odalis said, adjusting Everett in her arms. "You're not disturbing anything." Thaddeus lingered a moment, looking at her with a strange, thoughtful expression, the kind of look someone gives when a face seems familiar, but they can't place why. "He's lucky," Thaddeus said finally, nodding toward the baby. "Not every kid gets held like that. Like he actually matters." Odalis felt her throat tighten. "Every child matters. Try telling that to some of the people in this house." He caught himself, gave a short, embarrassed laugh. "Sorry. Long day. I shouldn't have said that." He knocked twice on the doorframe. An awkward goodbye. "Nice to meet you." "Odalis." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Odalis," he repeated slowly, like he was turning the name over, testing it against a memory. "That's a beautiful name. Unusual." "My mother's choice," she said, "not mine." "Well, good night, Odalis." He left, and she stood there a long moment after the door clicked shut, her heart pounding harder than it should have. "He knows my name means something," she thought. "He just doesn't know what. Yet." Downstairs, faintly, she heard the front door open and close, and Griffin's voice, her son's voice, deep and familiar even after all this distance, calling out a greeting to his wife. Odalis looked down at Everett, sleeping peacefully in her arms, utterly unaware of the storm gathering quietly around him. "Soon," she thought, "soon you'll know your grandmother held you first, and soon so will everyone else in this house." Griffin Marchetti didn't come home until after 9 most nights. Odalis learned this quickly, the rhythm of a man who filled his hours with anything but his own house. She would hear the front door, hear Priscilla's bright, performative voice greeting him in the foyer, hear it drop the moment he was out of earshot of anyone who mattered to her. On the 11th night, Odalis was in the nursery, when she heard footsteps that weren't Denise's careful, quiet tread. She turned, and there he was, her son, standing in the doorway of his own son's nursery, looking like a stranger in his own home. He was thinner than she remembered, tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He wore the same watch his father used to wear, She'd given it to him for his 25th birthday, the one nice thing she'd ever managed to buy him. And seeing it on his wrist now, in this house, made her chest ache. "Sorry," Griffin said, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted to see him before I went to bed." Priscilla said he was finally down. "He is," Odalis said, keeping her voice even, ordinary, a stranger's voice. "Just fell asleep 20 minutes ago." Griffin crossed the room and looked down into the crib. Something shifted in his face, softened, the way a man's face does, only for his own child. He reached down and touched Everett's small hand with one finger, so gently, and Odalis had to look away for a moment because it looked exactly like the way she used to check on him at night, all those years ago, in that little yellow kitchen house. "He looks like my mother," Griffin murmured, almost to himself. "Something about the mouth." Odalis's heart stopped. "You knew her?" she asked carefully. "Your mother?" Griffin's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. "I know her," he corrected quietly. "Present tense. She's still alive?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I assumed—" "It's fine." He straightened, and something guarded came down over his face like a shutter closing. "We're not close anymore. It's complicated." "Families often are," Odalis said softly. Griffin looked at her then. Really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived in this house. And for one terrifying second, Odalis thought he saw her, truly saw her. His eyes searched her face the way Thaddeus's had, that same flicker of something familiar here. "You remind me of someone," he said slowly. Odalis's pulse roared in her ears. "I have one of those faces," she said, forcing a small laugh. "People tell me that a lot." Griffin studied her another moment, then shook his head like he was shaking off something he couldn't name. "Sorry, long week." He looked back down at his sleeping son. "Thank you for taking care of him. Priscilla says you're good with him, better than the other one even." "He's a sweet baby." "He's the best thing I've ever done," Griffin said, and his voice cracked, just slightly, on the word done, like a man confessing something he wasn't proud enough to say louder. "I just wish I was around to see more of it." "Why aren't you?" The question slipped out before Odalis could catch it, too direct for a nanny, too much like a mother's question. Griffin blinked, surprised by it. But he answered anyway, maybe because it was easier to talk to a stranger than to the people who actually knew him. "Work," he said, "always work. It started as a way to prove something. Prove I could build something my family never had, and now I don't even know how to stop." He gave a hollow laugh. "My wife likes the life it buys. I think that's part of why I keep going." "Does she know that's why?" Griffin looked at her for a long moment. "No one's asked me that in years." The room fell quiet except for the baby's soft breathing. "I had a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on," Griffin said suddenly quietly, staring down at his son. "She never had nice things, never took a vacation. Sold her wedding ring to pay for my textbooks, if you can believe that. I only found out years later, from an old family friend, because she never would have told me herself. Too proud." Odalis's eyes burned. She had to grip the edge of the crib to steady herself. "She sounds remarkable," she managed. "She was," he caught himself. She is remarkable." He shook his head, frustrated with himself. "I don't even know why I'm telling the nanny all this." "Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't part of the story," Odalis said gently. Griffin gave a small, tired smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him since she arrived. "Maybe that's it." He looked at his son one more time, then back at her. "Good night, Odalis. Thank you. Really." He left, and Odalis stood alone in the nursery, tears finally slipping free, silent and hot down her cheeks. He remembers. He remembers everything. He just doesn't know how to come back. 2 nights later, Odalis found herself in the kitchen after midnight, unable to sleep, warming a small cup of milk the old way, on the stove, the way her own grandmother had taught her. She wasn't alone. Thaddeus sat at the massive kitchen island, jacket off, tie gone, a laptop open in front of him, and a mostly empty mug of coffee beside it. "Burning the midnight oil too?" he asked, glancing up. "Habit of old age," Odalis said. "Sleep doesn't come as easy as it used to." He smiled, closed the laptop halfway. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business." "You can ask." "How long have you known Griffin?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. Odalis kept her hands steady, stirring the milk. "I only started here recently. Why do you ask?" "No reason. It's just—" Thaddeus tilted his head, studying her the way he had that first night. "He mentioned you the other day, said you reminded him of his mother, and I've known Griffin 8 years. I've met his mother exactly once, at the wedding for about 4 minutes, before Priscilla's family more or less pushed her out of every photo." He paused, but there was something about the way he said it. Odalis's chest tightened. "People remind each other of people all the time." "Sure." Thaddeus didn't push further, but his eyes lingered a moment too long, curious and careful, like a man assembling a puzzle he wasn't sure he was allowed to finish. "For what it's worth," he said, quieter now, "whatever's going on in this house, and something is, you're one of the only decent things I've seen here in a long time." Denise said the same thing. "Everett's calmer with you than he's ever been with anyone." "That's kind of you to say." "It's true." Thaddeus stood, gathering his laptop. "Griffin used to be different, you know. Before all this." He gestured vaguely at the marble and the chandeliers and the empty grandness of it all. "Before her." "Priscilla?" Thaddeus's mouth pressed into a thin line, like he'd already said more than he meant to. "Good night, Odalis," he said instead. "Get some rest." He left her alone in the kitchen, the milk on the stove nearly boiling over, forgotten. Odalis turned off the burner and stood very still, staring at nothing, her mind racing. They're starting to see it. Griffin feels it. Thaddeus is starting to wonder. It's only a matter of time. And the very next morning, time ran out faster than she expected, because Priscilla, storming through the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, stopped dead in the doorway, staring at Odalis with an expression Odalis had never seen on her before. Not contempt, suspicion. "Hang on," Priscilla said into the phone, lowering it slowly, her eyes narrowing at Odalis across the kitchen. "I need to call you back." She hung up without waiting for a reply. "I did some digging on you last night," Priscilla said, voice deceptively calm, stepping closer, heels clicking against marble like a countdown. "The agency's records are strange, Odalis. Very strange." Odalis's blood went cold. "There's something you're not telling me," Priscilla said, her eyes hard as glass, "and I intend to find out exactly what it is." Odalis kept her hand steady around the handle of the milk pot, though her heart was slamming against her ribs. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am," she said. "Don't." Priscilla's voice was low, sharp as a blade, drawn slow from its sheath. "I called the agency this morning. They have no record of an Odalis Marchetti being sent here. None. I had to threaten to sue before some junior assistant admitted the paperwork was, in her words, unusual. Marchetti. Odalis had given her full legal name on the intake forms. A mistake born of exhaustion and old habit, 34 years of signing that name onto school forms and hospital bracelets and grocery store checks, and she hadn't thought, in the rush of pulling this plan together, to invent a different one. "Marchetti's a common enough name," Odalis said carefully. "Is it?" Priscilla's eyes glittered, cold and calculating. "Common enough that my husband happens to share it? Common enough that you show up out of nowhere with references I can't verify, and my son suddenly calms down like he's known you his whole life?" Odalis said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. "I don't know what your game is," Priscilla continued, circling her slowly, the way a shark circles before deciding whether something is worth the trouble of attacking. Maybe you're some relative hoping to worm your way into an inheritance. Maybe you're a reporter. I don't care which. What I care about is that there is a stranger in my house, with a fake background, alone with my son for hours every day. I would never harm that child, Odalis said, and for the first time, real emotion broke through the careful, deferential mask she'd worn for 2 weeks. Never. That's exactly what someone dangerous would say. Priscilla. Odalis caught herself too late. The name had come out too familiar, too easy, none of the mom she'd trained herself to use. Priscilla's eyes flared. You don't get to call me that. The kitchen door swung open. Denise stepped in, took one look at the scene, and froze in the doorway, sensing the danger the way staff in that house had learned to sense danger, early and from a distance. Get security, Priscilla snapped at her, not taking her eyes off Odalis. Now. Ma'am, please, there's no need, Denise started. I said now, Denise, or you can pack your own bags right alongside hers. Denise hesitated one more second, threw Odalis a look of helpless apology, and disappeared. Priscilla folded her arms, satisfied, triumphant. You have about 4 minutes before 2 large men escort you off this property. I'd use that time wisely if I were you. Start explaining or start walking. Odalis felt something crack open in her chest, not fear but grief, old and enormous, for the years she'd already lost with her son and the ones this woman was about to cost her too. I raised a boy in a small yellow kitchen with a broken window latch, Odalis said quietly, her voice trembling but steady in its purpose. I worked nights at a diner and mornings at a laundromat, so he'd never know how close we came to losing our apartment. I sold my wedding ring, the only thing of value I ever owned, to pay for his first semester of college, because a scholarship fell through and I refused to let him drop out. Priscilla's arrogant expression faltered, just barely, confused by the sudden shift in the air. I taught him to shake hands firmly and look people in the eye. I taught him that money doesn't make a man, character does, and then he married you. Odalis's voice cracked, and somewhere along the way he stopped calling, stopped visiting, and I never understood why until I came into this house and watched how you treat the people who can't fight back. What are you talking about? Priscilla's voice had lost some of its edge, replaced by something uncertain. I'm talking about the elderly woman you threw out of this house for bringing a jar of jam. I'm talking about Denise, who flinches every time you walk into a room. I'm talking about a housekeeper you fired over a missing towel that turned up the very next morning with no apology. Odalis took a step forward, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she let herself stand fully upright, fully present, no longer folding herself smaller to survive this house. I'm talking about my grandson, who deserves a mother who puts down her phone long enough to hold him without an audience. Priscilla's face had gone pale. Your grandson? Footsteps thundered down the hallway. 2 men in dark suits appeared in the doorway, but before they could move, another voice rang out, sharp and stunned. Mom! Griffin stood frozen in the kitchen entrance, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened from a day at the office. He'd apparently come home from early. His eyes moved from Odalis to Priscilla and back again, disbelief written across every line of his face. Mom, he said again, softer this time, like the word itself didn't make sense in this room. What? Why are you? He looked at her uniform, the plain grey cardigan, and understanding crashed over his features like a wave. You're the nanny? You been the nanny this whole time? Griffin, Odalis said, and her voice broke completely now. No more performance left in it. I just wanted to see. I wanted to know the truth about the woman raising my grandson, because you stopped letting me see for myself. Wait. Priscilla's head whipped between them, colour draining from her face. Wait, This is your mother? This is Odalis? Yes, Griffin said, his voice hollow with shock. This is my mother. The security men in the doorway shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. Get out, Priscilla said to them, not even looking their way, her voice suddenly small. Just get out. Give us the room. They left. Silence fell over the kitchen, thick and suffocating. You didn't recognize your own mother? Priscilla asked Griffin, disbelief cracking through her shock. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, Griffin said, and there was shame in his voice now, raw and unmistakable. 3 years, Priscilla, you know that. Because you told me she wasn't... Priscilla stopped herself. Wasn't what? Odalis asked quietly. Go on, finish it. Priscilla's jaw worked, but no words came. Griffin turned to his mother, his composure cracking apart entirely, tears standing bright in his eyes. Mom, I am so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Why didn't you just call me? Why would you do this, sneak into my own house? Because the last time I called, your assistant told me you were unavailable for the 4th time that month, Odalis said, and though her voice was gentle, the truth in it landed like a blow. Because I sent a birthday card to my own grandson and never even got a thank you note. Because I needed to see with my own eyes what kind of life you and Everett were living, since you'd stopped letting me see it any other way. Griffin's face crumpled. He set his briefcase down slowly, like his hands had forgotten how to hold anything. Priscilla stood very still, in the middle of the kitchen, staring at her mother-in-law, the woman she had insulted, dismissed, threatened, and nearly had thrown off the property, with a look of dawning, sickening horror. "Oh my God," Priscilla whispered, "the comments I made, the way I—" Her voice failed entirely. "Yes," Odalis said simply, "every single one." Upstairs, faintly, Everett began to cry, that same thin, tired wail Odalis had heard on her very first day in this house, and for a long moment, nobody in that kitchen moved at all. Everett's cry broke the silence like a bell tolling, and it was Odalis who moved first, the way she always had, toward the sound of a child who needed her. "I'll get him," she said quietly, and left Griffin and Priscilla standing in the wreckage of the last 10 minutes. Upstairs, she lifted her grandson from his crib, held him against her shoulder, and let herself cry freely now. No more hiding, no more careful Nanny's mask. He quieted against her the way he always did, small fingers curling into her cardigan, and Odalis stood by the nursery window for a long while, rocking him, letting the relief and the grief and the years of distance finally pour out of her all at once. Downstairs, the conversation between her son and his wife lasted almost an hour. Odalis didn't hear all of it, but she heard enough, raised voices, then lower ones, then something that sounded eventually like quiet crying from Priscilla, which surprised Odalis more than anything else that had happened that day. When Griffin finally came upstairs, his eyes were red-rimmed, his tie completely gone, his sleeves rolled up like a man who'd aged 5 years in one afternoon. "Mom," he said, standing in the nursery doorway, "can we talk? Really talk?" They sat together in the small rocking chair's twin, a cushioned bench by the window, Everett asleep now between them. "I got so caught up," Griffin said, staring at his hands, "in proving something, in building something so big nobody could ever look at me the way people looked at us back then, when we couldn't pay the electric bill, when kids at school knew, when I was ashamed." His voice caught, and somewhere in all that proving, I let go of the person who never once made me feel ashamed of any of it. I let Priscilla's world become the only world, and I stopped fighting for the one that actually raised me. "I know, baby," Odalis said, using the word she hadn't used in 3 years, and it felt like coming home. "I know. She's not a bad person, Griffin said carefully. She grew up in a house where kindness was seen as weakness, where staff were furniture, not people. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains some of it. She knows that now. She's ashamed, Mom. Genuinely ashamed. People can change, Odalis said, if they want to badly enough. Will you give her the chance to try? Odalis looked down at her grandson's peaceful face. For his sake, she said, I'll give anyone the chance to try. The change didn't happen overnight. Real change rarely does. But it began that very evening. Priscilla found Odalis in the kitchen after dinner, standing awkwardly in the doorway the way she never stood anywhere, always so certain, so commanding, and now so unsure of herself it was almost unrecognizable. I owe you an apology, Priscilla said. A real one. Not the kind I give when I'm caught, but the kind I actually mean. She swallowed hard. I was cruel to you. I was cruel to a lot of people in this house, and I told myself it was standards, that it was strength. It wasn't. It was just cruelty, dressed up nicely. Why? Odalis asked, not unkindly, but honestly. I'd like to understand. Because I was terrified, Priscilla admitted. Terrified that if I wasn't perfect, if this house wasn't perfect, Griffin would realize he married someone who didn't deserve any of it. So I made everyone around me small so I could feel big. It's not an excuse. It's just the truth, I think, for the first time in a long time. Odalis studied her for a long moment. The woman you threw out of this house. The one with the jam. I found her, Priscilla said quickly, through the old groundskeeper. I sent Denise with an apology and a proper gift, and an invitation to come back any time, no jars required. She hesitated. It doesn't undo it. I know that. No, Odalis agreed. But it's a start. Over the following weeks, Odalis stayed on, not as a hidden nanny anymore, but simply as herself, as Griffin's mother, welcomed properly into the enormous house that had once felt so cold and closed to her. Denise stopped flinching in doorways. The gardener was given a raise and a written apology. Priscilla, slowly, awkwardly, began asking Odalis questions about Griffin's childhood, about the woman who'd shaped the man she'd married, hungry for a version of her husband she'd never taken the time to know. Thaddeus, when he found out the truth, laughed so hard he had to sit down. I knew it, he said. I knew there was something about that name. 2 months later, Griffin threw a dinner, a real one, warm and unpretentious, in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room, with Denise and the groundskeeper and even the old woman with the jam preserves seated right alongside the family because Odalis had insisted, and Griffin, for once, hadn't argued. Priscilla sat beside her mother-in-law, holding Everett, and when the baby reached up and grabbed a fistful of her hair the way he used to grab Odalis's, she laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, nothing like the sharp voice that once echoed through these halls. He's got your grip, Priscilla said to Odalis, smiling. Some things run in the family, Odalis said, smiling back. Kindness if you let it, cruelty if you don't fight it. It's always a choice in the end. Griffin raised his glass that night, looking around the table at the people his house had once treated as invisible, now seated as family. To second chances, he said, his eyes finding his mother's across the table, and to the people brave enough to remind us who we're supposed to be. Odalis raised her glass too, tears in her eyes, but happy ones now, the kind that come after a long winter, when spring finally arrives. Because in the end, it wasn't the mansion or the money or the swan fountain out front that made this family whole again. It was one old woman, willing to put on an apron and disappear into the background, just to remind the people she loved most what truly mattered, and one house, finally, learning to see the people in it as more than furniture. The end.